The Ancient Gods DLC, ironically much like Doom Eternal itself, has sprung some divisiveness ever since its release, whether it be for the drastic change in difficulty with the second half, or even for how ball-busting it was during the first. But after a year, how does id Software's first shot at single-player post-launch content hold up? Let's find out. But before we begin, I want to take a quick prelude to discuss a bit of the development regarding these expansions. Single-player campaign DLC of some kind has been requested as far back as Doom 2016. With how that game basically came out of nowhere and blew people away, it's no surprise people wanted more of what it did best right off the bat. Although that wouldn't end up being the case, as id was already locked into development on 3 multiplayer expansions that would later be made free for all players. With the announcement of Eternal, they made it clear that single-player DLC would be a major priority post-launch, with Battle Mode getting free content drops. But unfortunately, I don't think anyone or even the developers expected the giant bump in the road that I personally believe made a giant impact on how these expansions came out. The 2020 global pandemic impacted pretty much every single industry, and gaming was certainly no different. And as a result, both of these DLCs had to be developed completely from home. The reason I'm bringing this up is because despite whatever criticisms I may have with these expansions and whether or not I truly believe they are worth the money, I want to fully emphasize that for what they are and the circumstances they likely had to work under, that I think the devs did a great overall job with these expansions, and I only wish things were different because I truly believe that it could have been even better. This isn't to say what we got is bad by any stretch of the means, or that it's completely flawless either for that matter. But it's clear to me that we could have gotten so much more, both in content and overall polish, had circumstances been different. And on the note as well of developmental bumps, we gotta talk about the music. Due to soundtrack-related mishaps, Mick unfortunately has axed himself off from id Software and Bethesda for the foreseeable future, and as a result, these 2 expansions were composed by different people. Considering how iconic and impactful Mick's work has been towards the Doom IP and its modern identity as a whole, people had a right to be at least a bit concerned, myself included. But in his place, we have both Andrew Hulshult, known for his work on Dusk, Quake Champions, and even his own metal covers of the original Doom soundtrack with IDKFA, and David Levy, who I actually didn't know who he was prior to this. It's funny, I remember when the composers finally got revealed and I saw Levy's post first and I was like, who is this? Ruby? Red versus Blue? What? And I got concerned until I saw Andrew's post, then got relieved. Many are divided on the soundtrack. Some enjoy it, while there's also this stupid large amount of people who barely gave it a chance because it just wasn't Mick, which is really unfair if you ask me. I can get the change being jarring, especially if you go from the base game immediately to the DLC, but to say no Mick means that the music is automatically bad is just really dumb. But, to be fair, I don't even think that mindset is 100% to blame as to why people feel this way. In fact, I'd say it's due more to something that I see barely anyone talk about, and that's due to the in-game mixing of the tracks. For whatever reason, at launch, the in-game mixing of Hulshult and Levy's DLC tracks were noticeably quieter than Mick's work in the base game. Just as an example, these were my audio settings when the game first launched, and I had to completely change them to this once the DLC came out just so I could try and hear and take in the music. And even then, it didn't feel as loud as it should. This honestly blows, because if you ask me, these tracks are really good for the most part. It's obviously a different take, and one that, again, can be jarring, especially coming straight off the base game, but a lot of inspiration from Mick is still in there in such a way that it doesn't feel like a ripoff. It's a bit more akin to Doom's original music roots, being the metal albums that the original id guys listened to while they worked every day. Even more impressive, because they apparently didn't have a whole lot of time to work on this.
It was like you've got Atlantica, you've got Blood Swamps, and you've got the Holt, and you've got 2 boss battles.
And we have to do all the cinematics on top of that.
Yeah,
too.
so it was 6 weeks for all that.
Yeah,
roughly. Yeah, I think it might have been 7. Like there may have been an extra week or something like that given. I can't quite remember, but it was like roughly.
I think last week was like for any like last minute tweaks or changes. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Now, take my word with a grain of salt, but I do believe the mixing was tweaked slightly since release, at least in Tag 1's case. I do remember noticing that it was slightly louder when I revisited it when Tag 2 released, and other people noticed the same thing, but at the same time, I'm not entirely sure. I want to compare just how loud the music is from both the base game and the DLC by having everything else in-game but the music muted, but putting it all without edits into Premiere, the audio levels seemed equal for the most part. I'm not sure if it's the game or perhaps even Shadowplay automatically equalizing my footage as audio, so take what I say regarding the mixing as you will. Either way, while I'm aware it's not everyone's thing and people want Mick back still, which I totally get, I still think that Hulshult and Levy deserve to stand in their own right compared to him. And on that note, let me go on another small tangent here. David Levy deserves more fucking credit. Seriously, coming from someone like me who, like many others, underestimated him prior to release, he is behind some of my favorite tracks from these expansions. Dare I say, they're even better than Hulshult in some places, and on par with Mick's base game work.
You what?
Yet, it's kinda hard for people to give it a proper chance when it's barely audible. And I can't exactly tell whose fault this is either, because it's clear these guys know how to mix their own tracks and make them feel larger than life. Even Levy has uploaded small bits of his tracks from the DLC on his YouTube channel, and they're much louder than what we actually get in game, and I highly encourage you to give it a listen when you have a chance. Is it a deal with the composers, or the audio engineers it did? I don't know. But what I do know is that we need an official soundtrack release of this DLC's music at some point. And I know the obvious response to me is going to be, but what about the base game soundtrack? It's still not on streaming. It's been 2 years. And to that I say, yet again, just let it go already. Unless Mick gets fired from or leaves Atomic Heart and becomes cool with Bethesda and id again overnight, the chance the base game soundtrack gets any kind of official release outside of the collector's edition is zero. It just isn't gonna happen. But even if we got these DLC's soundtracks on streaming, I would be super happy personally. Alright, background over, let's finally get into the DLCs themselves, starting off with the story. Alright, so where were we? With the death of the Icon of Sin by the hands of the Slayer, Hell's forces were unable to fully consume Earth. Humanity is safe, but not all is well as of yet. With the death of the Khan Maker and the awakening of the Icon, the seal of Urdak had been broken, meaning that any demons can now cross over into the once holy realm, and as a result, have completely corrupted it and now plan to use it as a starting point for further conquests. The Slayer knows already that if they aren't stopped, potentially all of existence is at risk. With help from the Ark and Samuel Hayden, they believe that the Seraphim, the very same being that gave the Slayer his godlike powers on Terrace Nabad all those years ago, is the key to figuring out how to regain control of Urdak and keep the demons at bay. The Ark was able to locate his body, sitting on an abandoned UAC oil rig facility in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Situated on a new ocean carrier, the Ark begins to send the Slayer over to recover the Seraphim, and take the first step to finish the fight once and for all.
The UAC won't hand over the Seraphim without a fight.
Oh wait, just give me 1 second. Yeah, this is more of a nitpick than anything else, and this applies to part 2 as well, but due to the fact that the DLCs are sold standalone and in turn can't exactly rely off of any base game save file, your runes and mods are defaulted to a specific preset already at the beginning of every single playthrough. Now, why anyone would play these expansions without playing the base game first is beyond me, but it's kind of annoying to have to go out of your way to change it at the beginning of every run. The game lets you know too constantly through the tutorials and loading screens that you have every upgrade and weapon already and to use everything at your disposal, yet never mentions that your runes were defaulted to a preset. I kinda wish they mentioned that somewhere in the beginning, because I and many others didn't realize for a bit that this was the case, and in turn began to suck more doing to have to play with runes that we aren't used to. Hell, even watching my friend play this expansion for the first time I forgot, and I'm the guy who's beaten it several times. It's not a big deal overall at the end of the day, but that just always bugged me. Anyways, Atlantica. Our first stop, and right off the bat, one of the highlights of these expansions for me. I'm just gonna cut straight to the point. This level visually is fucking awesome. I'm already a sucker for nighttime rainy environments and basically anything, but the aesthetic in this level 2 of the facility is absolutely god tier. It's got that grungy industrial feel from 2016, but flawlessly transferred over to Eternal's art style and color scheme, and I absolutely love it. Even smaller details too, like the raindrops sitting on your weapon or the face of the enemies, just go so far. That's something they didn't have to do, but they did it anyways, and it just makes this level come to life. Even tonally, it feels like we're picking up where we left off, as Final Sin had a nighttime lightning storm theme as well, and I kinda like that. Musically, I'm not exaggerating when I say that it's one of my favorites as well. We start off on a Levy track that, while it took a bit to grow on me, is still one of the first tracks that come to mind when I think of this expansion, and one I genuinely do feel is on par with the base game. Seriously, ever since it grew on me, I cannot get enough of it. difficulty of this level is basically on par with Final Sin as well, bringing the player back up to speed with endgame combat while also bringing in some small new twists. You've obviously got no crucibles, so that means aside from the BFG and Unmaker, which you're still going to rarely find ammo for, you're dealing with absolutely everything head-on with barely any chance to skimp out or be lazy at all. And I love that specific style of encounter design in this game. Speaking of difficulty, let's get into the first of our new enemies, starting off with the turret. It's more or less what you'd expect, requiring 2 high-powered shots to his eye in order to go down for good. Get too close or keep your aim onto the eye for too long and it'll go back down to its hole for a bit. Honestly, I didn't hate him at first, but never liked him on launch either. And even after the post-launch changes, I still feel kinda similar, even if it is better. On launch, turrets worked where if you fired on its weak point once, their eye would immediately go back into their hole. This honestly just made them feel tedious to fight and annoying more than anything else, and it felt unnecessary to prioritize them in targets even if you were getting damaged a ton by them. Now with future patches, it changed the behavior with the turrets so that once you hit their weak point once, there's a small grace period before they go back into their hole that you can use to quick swap to another precision weapon and take them down in one swift action. This is a much better change if you ask me, especially compared to just making them a one-hit kill like I and many others suggested, since it emphasizes learning quick switching more and being good with that and precise aiming. I still think they're kind of annoying and unnecessary, but they are much more tolerable. Also, yeah, I know there was that bug at launch where you could kill turrets in one shot with a well-aimed sticky bomb, but that was patched out and not-intentional, so I'm not counting that. But what are those aforementioned twists that get thrown into combat? Aside from those turrets being placed throughout some encounters, this level loves to double and throw in lots of interesting enemy combos. Carcasses with dual barons, dread knights, cyber mancubi, and much more. Even being forced to deal with archviles head-on instead of having to rely on the crucible as a let me give you one charge to fuck off is super refreshing and fun. And who could forget the moment difficulty ores cream themselves?
Oh, great heavens!
Funnily enough, this is the easiest hard encounter, and it was the one hyped up in the most in promotional material, and it's in the first level. And if you're watching this and have only played the base game of Eternal, you might be thinking to yourself, what's harder than 2 Marauders at once? You'll see. Going back to the level overall for a moment, the flow and how every arena connects to each other is one thing that I feel is super important for a modern Doom level to do, and this level accomplishes that successfully if you ask me. It never feels like there's any major stopping points, and I absolutely love as well how the level changes visually as you progress further and further once the self-destruct activates from picking up the key to the Seraphim's chamber, now tasking you with traversing the fiery remains of the facility and even going underwater. Also, did anyone else think of blood once they saw the dive suit?
Killer fish from San Diego.
We have a few side objectives for 100% completion, but it isn't a whole lot. Of course, we got the normal lore scrolls that go towards completion, but also secret encounters. I didn't like these in the base game, and I really don't like them here either. My main issue with them is the fact that they have such tight time limits that it feels like completing them is pure trial and error most of the time. A lot of the time I just say fuck it and either use a BFG or spam rockets in order to complete them. And they don't reward anything really noteworthy either, just a color palette swap skin for completing both of them in a level. At least you got upgrade points for them in the base game, but there's no real need here since everything is upgraded already. Slayer gates also make a return, with not a whole lot changing except for the rewards you get. Instead of weapon points and an Empyrean key, you get the choice to choose one of 3 new passive runes to go alongside your original loadout. These include Desperate Punch, allowing your blood punch to do twice the damage if your health is 75 or less, Take Back, allowing you to regain a lost extra life if you kill the demon that got you in a short time frame, and finally, Break Blast, generating a concussive blast that vultures demons once you destroy a weak point. I personally use Break Blast the most out of the 3, but these are all still really useful regardless in their own right, except for Take Back. Conceptually it sounds useful until you realize the fact it can't be used on Extra Life Mode or Ultra Nightmare. UN I get because there's no extra lives in that mode at all, so there's no point, but why extra life mode? Does it really make the mode that much easier to the point where it's worth blocking it from use? It's not like it's super easy to regain back extra lives in the first place anyway, especially from high health demons or enemies that can only be killed via weak point openings like the Marauders or Bloodmakers. Hell, I debate if anything that the current time limit is too short because again, if a demon with high health or is based purely around its weak point takes your extra life, there's at least least a 99% chance you won't have enough time to kill it, and you'll still lose that extra life no matter what, even if you use quick switch combos. It's not like it's super overpowered conceptually either compared to the other two runes. In fact, you can debate that it's much wiser to pick either of the other ones so you can kill as efficiently as possible still. It's just kinda weird how it's outright banned like that. After some time, we finally make it to the Seraphim's chamber, as Samuel decides to transfer his consciousness into the body via the Maker Key, much like how Vega transferred himself back in Urdak, revealing what basically every hardcore theorist assumed beforehand, that Samuel Hayden himself is the Seraphim. And he sounds,
We have been allies for some time now. I knew who you were the moment you set foot in our world, and who you could become to us. I brought you to the Divinity Machine and gave you your power. Where would all of this be now had I not had the foresight to create you?
Yeah, I don't know why, but the Seraphim has this weird voice filter on him whenever he speaks, and I physically cannot take him seriously as a result. I'd assume this is due to the transfiguration his body's going through, mentioned in the next cutscene, since he really doesn't sound like this back in that Tears Nabad flashback.
We must move. Quickly. There are those who would seek to stop this. And now, they will fear you.
But even then, it's just kinda weird. He sounds like Vinny doing a Cher impression, and that always takes me out of the scene whenever he speaks.
I can see so many things now. Will I not know?
Back on the Arc Carrier, the Seraphim says that he requires the physical presence of the Father via his life sphere in order to not become corrupted via rapid transfiguration. The sphere is sitting on top of the Ingor's Sanctum, located in the blood swamps of Hell, the very same place mentioned in our time in Necrovol, where rejected souls unfit for Argent energy production go to suffer. Maker beings cannot set foot into hellish realms or even tamper with life spheres, so Hell just be waiting for us at the top while we do our job. Did anyone else think that the Arc Carrier would fill in the place of the Fortress of Doom as a hub for this DLC? We only actually explore it in first person here and no other time, and there's basically nothing of interest inside of it. I'm not complaining, but it's just kinda weird that it's only explorable here and no other time, and it's basically just one room with the portal and nothing else. It almost makes me wonder if we were supposed to have a hub like the Fortress, but it was just cut for time. I always find amusement in this one specific guy though, who just can't get whatever the hell he's trying to reach. What is it, pen? Button? I don't know. We go through the portal to the blood swamps and... oh boy. The Blood Swamps is a level I have a weird relationship with. If you remember my FPS Elitism Needs to Die video, you'll remember me mentioning how my first experience with this DLC wasn't the best, and this level specifically was the turning point for me on my first run. It was the first time ever in my time with Doom Eternal where I actually flat out rage quitted for the day, because it both exhausted and frustrated me that much to the point where I just said, fuck this, I'm done. This level canonically is the literal place where souls unfit for Argent energy production go to suffer endlessly, and that's honestly pretty accurate to how I felt my first time playing this on launch. Now, why is that? We'll get there. But let's start off with the level itself in regards to its presentation and sound. Visually, much like Atlantica, this level hits it out of the park. The art team took the concept of a hell swamp and just went absolutely fucking nuts with it. I still remember when I first loaded into this level, I just took a good 5 seconds soaking in the atmosphere and especially admiring that giant titan corpse at the spawn point. It's just such a cool set piece to start off the level. The sound of otherworldly plants and hellish crickets chirping just drives the setting home so well, and it helps that the music is super good as well. This is one of the few tracks that the majority of the community agrees is on par with the base game, and it isn't hard to see why. Seriously, I'd say that this is on par with some of Hulshult's best works from Dusk, like Departure to Destruction and Handgun Harmony. I've got not much else to add other than I wish that the other tracks done by Hulshult were as good as this one. structure and flow is interesting too, especially considering how I didn't exactly feel it at first. This level feels like a loosely connected gauntlet of combat encounters, and to be fair, I kinda think that was the point. You're definitely meant to feel like you're going up against a challenge unheard of up to this point, where many before you fell trying in order to meet the Father. I didn't feel it worked super well at first, but the more I played it, it kinda weirdly grew on me. I think with the story context in mind, it kind of works, but I totally get why some others didn't feel it like I did, even after repeated playthroughs. It's a weird structure for a level. And speaking of not feeling on my first run, it's time to talk about the difficulty, and just why it bothered me so much to the point where I hated this DLC after my first playthrough. Right off the bat, once you get into your first combat encounter, this level basically tells you that it isn't fucking around anymore, and the gloves are off.
Oh my god!
But that alone wasn't why I got so tilted at this level. That is because of the Spirit, and more specifically, the Spirit Baron. Taking on the appearance of Doom 2016's Summoner, the Spirit is able to take possession of any enemy on the battlefield and completely buff its health, attack and traversal speed, and range. Once the Spirit is killed, they must be completely eliminated with the Plasma Rifle's Microwave Beam mod, or else it will continue to transfer itself to any other available demon until everything in the arena is killed. Now, you may be asking if you didn't play this DLC at launch, why the Baron specifically? That's because if you specifically chose the right path of the fork like I did, this is how you were introduced to the enemy. Not with a mid-tier enemy, but a high-tier, already high-health enemy. This is not how they should have introduced the enemy. I can handle Spirit Barons fine nowadays thanks to experience, but I still won't ever forget being fucked by him constantly just on his initial encounter alone. Specifically, that fucking ground stomp move. I haven't heard another person say for certain that spirit enemies have increased range, but I swear to God I'm convinced that they do just for the fact that I died so many times to that stomp attack, even if I was just on the edge of it. And even after I finally got past him, I would find out later how not only they are immune to the ice bomb, but also have invulnerable weak points, and that specifically made me hate the enemy once I found out. Weak points are such a crucial part of Doom Eternal's combat loop, and I felt that making an enemy able to make them completely invulnerable was just a dumb, unnecessary gimmick made to artificially increase difficulty. And what didn't help either was that aforementioned mindset I had on the combat loop of Eternal before going in, that I had completely mastered it and knew the game front to back. Just to clarify, before Tag 1's release, I beat the campaign about 4 or so times all the way through, half of them on Nightmare. I was convinced that I knew the inner workings of Eternal and how its enemies and combat worked like the back of my hand, so when Tag 1 launched, I did my first run on Nightmare, confident that I would blast through it in a day easily. I mean, 3 levels, what, like only 2 hours? But the harsh reality was that I couldn't have been any more wrong. I gave myself zero room or thought that maybe I was just bad and need to improve because, in my mind, that was impossible. I beat the game on the highest difficulty, so clearly I knew everything. That cocky mindset made my first playthrough absolutely miserable, and I really wish looking back I either played on Ultra Violence or just plain ditched the mindset entirely, since it also impacted my thoughts of some other games. Once I actually took a step back and replayed the DLC on both UV and then Nightmare again, throwing that ego I had aside and giving myself the chance to learn the enemy and make mistakes, I realized that spirits were far from the gimmicky bullshit enemy I assumed. And the main reason for that is because I wasn't using all the tools at my disposal. You know how I said before that one of my main initial issues with spirits is how their weak points were completely immune to any damage? Technically, that isn't even the case. The spirit has a weak point, and that's its higher health pool. Now, I know that sounds like it doesn't make sense at first, but that's until you realize the solution is to use some of those weapon mods that may have been collecting dust in your loadout. The Spirit works because he actively encourages you to utilize mods with high damage values and the ability to falter, which I barely used prior in the base game. And not just the obvious ones either, like the Ballista and SSG. The Shotgun Full Auto, Chain Gun Shield, Mobile Turret, Lock-on Rockets, Micro Missiles, and even the Microwave Beam itself are key weapons to use in order to eliminate possessed demons. And not just for obviously eliminating the spirit either. The Microwave Beam specifically has an extended stun effect on spirit-possessed enemies, which can help quite a bit to either give you a moment to breathe or throw down some frag grenades for an easy falter. Even for the micro missile specifically, I never realized that the upgrade that allows you to buff your missile's damage via kill of any enemy was even a thing that existed until this DLC when I activated it on accident. Yeah, when I was 100%ing the base game, I kinda just stopped paying attention to what the upgrades did on the mods I barely used. My logic at that point in time was more or less, well, this mod hasn't helped me already, so why should I use it now even after it's upgraded? The reason the Spirit didn't initially click with me is because I was too stubborn towards truly using all of my toolbox. But once I did and began experimenting, the game became even more fun. If the base game made you use like 75% of your toolbox, Tag 1 makes you use at least 90% of it. Breaking out of that ignorant mindset with my playstyle and learning to experiment more made me go from hating the enemy to absolutely loving its inclusion more and more over time. I know the whole design of Hugo Martin's fun zone is controversial to some, but I think this experience I had just proves that it works. It wasn't easy and I really needed to get out of my comfort zone, but once I did, I had an amazing time, and the Spirit slowly became one of my favorite additions to Eternal's bestiary. Now, I know another criticism people have with the Spirit specifically, and some of Tag 2's enemies, is how they can fundamentally only be eliminated with the microwave beam. And in a way, I kinda get that. Hell, one of my main complaints with Horde mode, if you may remember, is the possibility of having to face a Spirit without a plasma rifle. But compared to some other enemies that have a similar design mindset, I don't have an issue with it here because I feel the choice in making Spirit-possessed enemies be more vulnerable to the microwave beam by default means you're kinda more inclined to have it equipped already. As a whole, you're encouraged to get more acquainted with using this mod against possessed demons within combat, not just to finish them off, so in that regard, it doesn't bug me personally. But at the same time, unless you really like switching to it for a lot of faltering and weak point elimination, this kinda makes the Heat Blast useless within Tag 1's design. It's not to say you can't use it period or incorporate it into your playstyle, but with how much the Spirits emphasize the use of the microwave beam, even outside of it being the only way to kill it, it just kinda pushes the Heat Blast to the side a bit compared to the base game. If you don't have the beam ready by default once you kill a Spirit, you're kind of in a really bad spot. Maybe make it have a longer filter duration by default when using the blast against it, or even perhaps make it so that when using a heat blast on a Spirit on its own, it disables it from transferring itself to another demon with just enough time for you to switch mods and deliver the final blow. I'm not going to sit here and say that this is the way to fix it since it's likely very flawed in its own right, but my point is that even for as much as I love the Spirits edition, I feel that some of the criticisms people do have against the enemy should be acknowledged as well, since I do understand them. Now, the other reason I brought up the Spirit Baron specifically was because of the controversy that came from changing the encounter post-launch from a possessed Baron to a possessed Hell Knight. Many people feel that this single change completely removes the challenge of this DLC, and I just think that's really dumb. Because like I said, an enemy of that large of a tier should not have been introduced that early on as an introduction to the enemy type. As an introduction, it's way too punishing to the player. And even if you got better with time, it still just isn't the way to introduce the enemy. The level is hard already, yes, but the Baron was just an unneeded difficulty spike in the midst of everything else that, if anything, made more people like myself believe that Spirit enemies were just a dumb gimmick to make the game harder, when as mentioned prior, that is far from the case. This DLC being harder than the base game isn't a terrible thing, nor is the Spirit's existence as an enemy, but the fact that people acted like replacing this one enemy completely ruined the challenge of it or made it brain dead easily just frustrates the hell out of me, because it doesn't do that. This DLC is still really challenging, but it simply makes the game more fair for that first time player, and that's not a horrible thing. And it's not like the Baron Spirit combo is completely eliminated from the level either, it's just now one of those ending trial encounters, and that's how it should have been if you asked me. Build the player up by facing a weaker demon possessed by the Spirit to facing an even bigger, badder one by the end. That being said, what does warrant criticism is how almost every Spirit encounter this level, with the exception of the ones at the end of each path, are possessed Hell Knights, sometimes on their own for whatever reason. I feel it could have been a bit more dynamic and fresh to utilize different types of Spirit-possessed demons, or even trying to combine it with other enemies to ramp up the tension more. Carcasses, Pinkies, Dread Knights, or Prowlers being possessed or used in combination with other possessed enemies could work really good with the escalating challenge, but yet most of the other Spirit encounters of this level, with exception to the ones at the end of each path, use the Hell Knight, and I can't help but wish they would have done more in that regard. I think there's absolute reason to critique some of the changes, but if you think the reason is purely because the first enemy encounter isn't as punishing and unfriendly to the player as possible, then I really don't think you entirely understand how Eternal, or even the Doom franchise as a whole, is designed. It's not made to be brutally difficult, although it can be, but rather offer a fair, tough challenge that anybody can overcome so long as they use everything at their disposal and pay attention to their resources and how your personal playstyle and rune set works. And while I, again, wouldn't understand personally why you would play these expansions without playing the base campaign first so that you completely understand everything, these DLCs should still be fair towards everyone, and starting off with that Baron as an introduction to the spirit just wasn't fair. And just because it's easy for someone who has experience doesn't mean it's easy for everyone else. Oh yeah, and if you're wondering why I'm only mentioning the changes to this level and not the ones done in Atlantica or even the Holt, it's because I'm gonna be totally honest, I couldn't see a whole lot of difference in either of those levels. Even for Tag 2 as well post-launch now that I think about it. I was originally going to go in depth with the changes with these levels until I realized how invisible they were, and also that there's just too much misinfo out there on what changed and what didn't, that I'm bound to just fuck something up. And at the end of the day, I'm going to be honest, I really don't care a whole lot. Sure, there's some small things and probably more I'm missing, but honestly, they were nothing that stuck out super hard. Aside from that Baron, I remember there were a few carcasses missing in Atlantica's opening arenas, but those were added back, so it's really not even an issue anymore. Just feels so unnecessary to talk about aside from the Baron, because that's the most noticeable. Like, do people really memorize the spawns of every specific enemy in every encounter? I don't know, I just don't feel it's worth talking or complaining about at the end of the day. Oh yeah, I nearly forgot when writing this to mention as well the other enemy technically introduced in this level, the Spirit Whiplash. I know he's technically not limited to the DLC anymore, as he's made appearances in many base game master levels from SG and onwards, but this level was the first time he was ever implemented officially. He's more or less what the name already implies, a Whiplash but with a Spectre invisibility effect over him. But that simple change makes much more of an impact on combat encounters than one might assume. The invisibility effect means that, much like their pinky counterparts, weapons and mods with lock-on capabilities such as the meat hook and lock-on rockets cannot work. So instead of instantly deleting with one batch of lock-on rockets like I would otherwise, I'm forced to use explosives and other such mods to otherwise falter and do damage to them, like the remote detonate, sticky bombs, heat blast, and even the normal frags and ice bomb from the equipment launcher. I've got nothing else to add here other than they're a pain and an absolute joy to fight. Once the 2 gauntlet paths are completed, there's one more trial before we're able to go to the Sanctum, and it's this small mini-boss encounter of sorts. You've got these floating moving eye turrets that can shield themselves as some medium-tier demons try to get in your way. It's weird, I never thought much of this encounter beforehand, but honestly, more I think about it, it's kind of a smaller evolution of 2016's Hell Guards. How it starts off with one before throwing 2 at you while also inadvertently testing your combat abilities, granted both in very different ways. Also helps that this fight is complemented by another favorite track of mine from Levy. Once the trial is complete and the key to the Sanctum is revealed, a Titan lifts us up as we meet Samur on the top, waiting for us to resurrect the Father, but we aren't planning on doing that. The Slayer's plan is not to resurrect the Father, but rather to destroy his life sphere and instead resurrect the Dark Lord with his life sphere, and we do just that to Samur's dismay. The Slayer knows at this point that the Makers are just as corrupt as the forces of Hell, so trying to ally himself with them could just lead to more trouble further down the line. It's better to just deal with them now rather than wait and see what they could get up to later. As for the Dark Lord, defeating him in combat will in turn eliminate every demon and hellish force across the universe. With both of them gone, the 2 main forces that threaten humanity and the Sentinels will be completely gone, and everything would be solved, or so we think. Back on the Arc Carrier, everyone's naturally panicking, not understanding what the Slayer's trying to do, but charmingly, the intern knows what's up and what to do.
Assuming you want to use that orb to go to Urdak, right? Listen, whatever we do, I'm in. You want to wake the devil not so you can help the demons, it's so you can kill their leader once he's taken physical form, and that'll destroy all of them, for good, right? Okay, I'll take that as a yes. I just want to be part of this.
With the portal to Urdak prepped, our goal now is to head to the Luminarium and resurrect the Dark Lord back into his physical form there.
Alright, ready for launch, Doom Guy. I'm sorry.
I actually don't have a whole lot to say about this level flow or design-wise that doesn't already apply to the other two levels up to this point, other than it's top-notch, even if I do like the latter two just a little bit more personally. It's more the combat we've seen in Blood Swamps, but with debatably a better flow, and amped up even more with the types of spear-possessed enemies used, and also the addition of our last new enemy, the Bloodmaker. Effectively, he's a souped-up Maker drone with a weak point that's invulnerable most of the time. His super accurate ranged attacks can slow you down badly and catch you off guard too, especially if you're in a claustrophobic arena. He's a non-issue most of the time. Mostly. Visually, this level's great too, even if it's a bit more on the reuse side. The concept of exploring Urdak after our actions in the base game was a super interesting concept, and I think they did a really great job here. We also got another Hulshult track on this level, which isn't bad at all, even if I prefer Levy's tracks and Blood Swamps a bit more. I really like as well how it kind of carries over that otherworldly, uncanny horror aspect from Urdak's original track from the base game, but just done in a more chaotic way to reflect the ruined state that it's in. Otherwise, I don't have much else to say about this level in regards to encounters at least. It's more of what you'd expect at this point. But I definitely have a love for this level's Slayer Gate especially. That Spirit Marauder and those dual Archviles is something I don't think a lot of people are ever going to forget, and I loved it personally. Probably my favorite encounter in the DLC now that I think about it. As we get closer and closer to this expansion's final boss, we gotta get back to the story for a moment. As we progress through the level, we began to hear transmissions from Vega, who we left back here when we came in the base game. Much like we thought prior, Vega is indeed the preserved consciousness of the Father, assuming that we're here to resurrect him physically via his life sphere, which isn't the case. After some time, we finally make it close to the Luminarium, where Samur's waiting for us. His transfiguration is complete, and in turn becomes a fully corrupted Maker being. If we're to resurrect the Dark Lord, we need to get through him. And... Samur fucking sucks. He's an awful boss fight to cap off the DLC, and I will always die on that hill, especially compared to the Dark Lord. And I'm convinced people just like this boss because it's harder than him and nothing more, not because it's well designed or anything. This boss fight left such a terrible taste in my mouth that I barely replayed the Holt as a result of it, and even on repeat playthroughs my opinion hasn't changed, and that's even after I improved and learned the fight. And before you come screaming to me, but Cat, fighting two spirits isn't that hard, just get good. That isn't my issue. In fact, I think the idea of fighting two spirits at once is a great challenge to cap off the DLC. But what ultimately kills any enjoyment of this fight is the arena design. For one, it's fucking boring visually. Seriously, it's just a generic square Maker room divided into 10 squares that rise up and down. I could literally make something like this in 2016 Snap Map. It's so lazy and unfun to fight in. But that's the least of my issues. In fact, the first half of this boss is totally fine. Fun even. Where it gets really bad is the final phase. Not only are several of the towers raised, you have to deal with a claustrophobic area on the ground, and not only do you have to deal with both a spirit-possessed Pain Elemental and Dread Knight, but also this fucking Bloodmaker. But didn't you just say like 5 minutes ago that Bloodmakers were easily? Yeah, they typically are. But in claustrophobic areas like this, waiting for him to open his weak point so I can shoot him, alongside having to deal with the two spirit enemies, means you're just going to be hit a lot and slowed down as a result. But just kill him. I would. Except for the fact that even if you do, they still spawn in another one not even a full 2 seconds later. When I kill a Bloodmaker, I don't feel like I've bought myself time to focus on the spirits. I feel like I'm delaying the fucking inevitable. And what doesn't help either is how the traversal method between the upper and lower parts of the arena aren't reliable whatsoever. Every time you die, the loading screen tells you to use these teleporters to go to the different levels. And that would be fine if you could fucking see what's on the other side. Remember that Pain Elemental? I hope you did, because guess what? If you didn't go for him first, there's at least a 75% chance that if you take that teleporter, he's gonna be right on the other side to take off half of your health or just kill you. Why? And as if all of that wasn't enough, let's talk about actually killing the spirits. By default, when you use the microwave beam, you have a small movement penalty. And during this boss fight, when you kill one possessed enemy, they'll spawn in a normal version of that demon that you'll need to dodge as the spirit will try to possess it. And that's fine in the early phases. Dashing a little bit will solve your problem. But in this last phase, not only are you going to have to deal with trying to do this in a tiny ass space while avoiding the other spirit demon, but also the Bloodmaker and the normal version of that demon that got spawned in. But what if I actually got above normal ground? You'll have more space and be able to manage it better, sure, but guess what? Unless you're really lucky, that Bloodmaker will snipe your ass while you're just trying to microwave beam the spirit, leading to either death or, again, you losing a good chunk of your health. And no, extra health being added to the arena doesn't make it any easier either. The health economy isn't the problem. It's this fucking custom level ass arena. And again, I like the challenge this boss proposes on paper, but the arena doesn't complement it one bit. What works about a lot of Eternal's other boss fights is the variety in its arenas, giving you a ton of space and easy ways to maneuver and get to wherever you want. If you want to give us a more claustrophobic arena for a boss fight, then fine. I think that can work great. But what works about bosses like the Icon of Sin and the Con Maker is that traversal is easy and accessible. There's jump pads and monkey bars constantly across the arena, making it simple to get to whatever point you want, while also utilizing dynamic hazards in the arena still from either the boss itself or the enemies being spawned in. But most importantly, you can fucking see where you're going. And if there's something dangerous there, you can very easily make that decision to deal with whatever's there or try to find some other place to go. But with the teleporters in Samur's arena, that's physically impossible. It's a fucking gamble whether or not you'll get attacked if you come from the other side. I don't get it. Why the devs think these teleporters were the best option for reliable arena traversal? Why not give us a few jump pads or something in its place? At least then you'll be able to see where you're going. The only real way you're going to be able to do that is by meat hooking the one flying enemy during this phase, which again, unless you decide to deal with it first, you're shit out of luck. And again, there's always still the endlessly spawning Bloodmaker that's always ready to 360 trick shot your ass even if you're in the air meat hooking. Just because this fight is challenging doesn't make it fun. You can make something fun while make it challenging, which literally every other boss fight in the base game does, and this doesn't. I don't care if I'm bad at it and you're better. I don't have any fun fighting this boss, and that matters more than anything else if you ask me. You can make hard boss fights and still make them fun to fight. At least the music is good though. Hulshult kind of gives me that 2016 Mastermind Cyber Demon feeling with this track. Although I'm going to have to give it a few points off because the fan-made name for this track is just a few letters off from Sussy Hayden, and that's just not okay. You don't even get to kill him in the end, which is more disappointing. At least we kill every other boss we encounter in both this game in 2016, even in Tag 2. Here, Father's just all like, you know, you don't have to kill him actually. In fact, I won't even give you choice. I'll just take him away for you. Come on, Sam, I'll give you a McFlurry on the way home. It's so damn unsatisfying. And I know they're likely going to send him up to play some major part in the next game, so it's not a big deal overall. But it always just felt super anticlimactic to me. Once we step into the Luminarium, we give the Dark Lord's life sphere to be resurrected, only to reveal that the Dark Lord is not just a leader of hell, but its fiercest warrior, taking on the appearance of the Slayer himself, as we're hit with a to be continued. I actually remember this ending being pretty divisive launch day, and I kinda get why, but it definitely makes more sense thinking about it. Sure, it might seem cheap on paper to make this universe's equivalent to Satan just be evil Doom guy, but at the same time, it's kind of hard to realistically imagine anything else that could actually be a tangible threat. We know at this point that the Slayer is more than capable of anything that the universe throws at him, so it makes sense that the only thing to actually rival him in terms of stakes would be himself. Again, I get how this twist can kinda just like feel weird how it's come out of nowhere, but I think it makes sense. Overall, while very much flawed and absolutely not for everyone, I think Part 1 is a very good experience, despite its short length. And while I am personally not bugged by the difficulty and design decisions, I can totally understand why some others would. And again, it's not to say that expansion shouldn't or can't be harder. I am all for that. but I do honestly think they went a bit too far in some places, and in turn, turned a lot of first-time players such as myself really off. Which is why Tag 2 took a much more different direction, for better or worse. I think honestly my only other personal complaint, and this goes for part 2 as well, is the general lack of collectibles or replay value. I actually really love the secret hunting and exploration aspects of 2016 and Eternal, yet unfortunately these levels are very linear for the most part, which really sucks. The lore scrolls, while always a fun read, don't do a whole lot for me, and neither do the skins that come from the secret encounters. A part of me kinda wishes they had that maker skin be the actual reward for completing all the secret encounters instead of just it being given to you for buying the DLC. I honestly don't understand either why we couldn't have had any collectible figures hidden throughout the levels, even if they were just lazy and decided to recolor the figures for the enemy variants. Or hell, even if we got more music discs in the form of rep from other id games. The only other replay value that exists here, aside from achievements or milestones, is just beating the campaign again on Extra Life Mode or Ultra Nightmare, which is kinda lame if you ask me. But it's honestly minor in the long run. Tag 1 is still a fun experience overall, even if its design decisions may not jive with absolutely everyone. As time passed, we only got tidbits of Part 2 info being drip-fed during live streams with Hugo and Josh. The wait was anxious, but eventually, Tag 2 would finally release on the 1-year anniversary of Eternal's release in 2021. And to say the reception it got was unique isn't giving it enough credit, but we'll get to that. But how does this DLC hold up a year on, even after its patches? We begin right where we left off from Part 1, with the Slayer in the Luminarium resurrecting the Dark Lord, as he does the most logical form of problem solving instantly.
No blood can be spilled in this holy place.
The Dark Lord tells us to meet him at the city of Immora for the final battle, kicking us straight into the first level. Man, now that I think about it, this is a lot more straightforward than Part 1's intro. Like, only 2 lines are spoken here compared to the, like, 8 or so in Part 1's. Our first stop in our road trip to Hell's capital city is Argentinur again. Which, wasn't it completely hellified last time, or did we just like completely fix that when we killed Levy and laid the Wraith's souls to rest? It doesn't really matter a whole lot in the long run. I'm sure I'm just missing something here, but that always confused me. I'm gonna spoil my thoughts on basically every level visually right here, because I really don't feel like repeating myself by saying this looks boring every time we start a new level, so these levels are kind of boring visually. Not to say they look ugly by any stretch of the means, they're just on par graphically with everything else we've seen in the game up to this point. But it's so damn samey. A lot of the specific DLC's locales feel like reskinned and reused versions of what we've seen in the base game. The World Spear in particular just feels like a more grassy, bright blue version of Terrace Nevada or Exultia until it gets snowy in the later half of the map after you ride that dragon. It feels like just another Sentinel themed level, which is kinda hard to shake, and that feeling of familiarity unfortunately permeates through the other 2 levels. Not even the new additions, for as interesting as some of them are, can really save that for me. And the music is just fine. They gave more tracks to Hulshult this time around, I assume because nobody wanted to give Levy a chance still, but it's not like they really could have in the first place considering how quiet it was there and still is here. I don't like dissing Hulshult a whole lot because he is absolutely talented and can make some great tracks, but he has absolutely done better than this too in my opinion. The few Levy tracks in this expansion are my personal favorites, even including that new title screen music. Kinda gives me slight Hellwalker vibes, almost too like something straight out of Killing Floor 2. definitely do like Mick's main menu theme a bit more personally, as I feel it reflects the game itself a bit better, but I really do think people wipe off Levy's theme a bit too much. But on that note, let's get into those new additions. While not a new enemy, one of our first new additions is this meat hook tether for platforming. I've got basically no complaints with this, except that I really wish they were in the base game because they make platforming sections a lot more fun than they already are. I absolutely love how, like with quick switching, they took what was originally an unintended exploit and decided to run with it and make it an official part of gameplay. Granted, I'm also a sucker of first-person platforming of any kind involving a grappling hook, so that probably helps as well. We also get 3 new enemy types in this level, first being the Screechers. An interesting concept, being a sentient buff totem that activates when killed or fired upon, but at the same time is kinda just annoying if you ask me. You're really not allowed to use explosives or just about anything with splash damage around them, which is kinda crucial when you want to do big amounts of damage on groups or single enemies. And aside from that purple glow around them, they kinda tend to blend in with other fodder demons quite easily. It makes me wish they had their own model instead of just an unwilling with a purple glow so that they could be more easily identified. I think they can be used in some interesting fashions, but more so in smaller, more confined encounters, like that room with the Helm Knight and Spectre Whiplashes in Reclaimed Earth. Throwing them in larger, more grand encounters like most of the ones in this level just feels kinda cheap and more in that realm of artificial difficulty if you ask me. They aren't an awful idea, but they're just kinda meh at the end if you ask me. We also have the Armored Baron, or as I like to call him, the Cyber Baron, because honest to God, why isn't he called the Cyber Baron? That make a lot more sense to me considering his armor works more or less the same way as the Cyber Mancubus. The only difference is that he has an extra step to him, being that you can't do any damage to him period unless his armor is gone. Eliminate with the plasma rifle or use a precision weapon on his mace when it glows and kill him as fast as possible or else he'll regrow it. I kinda like how there's more than one way to eliminate the armor alongside how this enemy's attack patterns work. Almost a rarity when it comes to the new enemies in these expansions. His mace also has a super large reach that always felt more oppressive than the normal Barons, which I liked a lot. Other than that though, I don't have much else to say. He's fun, I like him. And finally for this level, we have the Stone Nymphs, which, okay, you sensing a pattern here? Yeah, one of the main complaints especially levied towards this DLC is how a lot of the new enemies are basically just reskins with gimmicks that work either okay or annoying. And I'm kind of in the middle on this. I think reskins can be fine as enemy concepts if they bring something new to the table or encourage you to rethink how you approach them when combined with other types of enemies, like the Spectre Whiplashes for instance. But at the same time, it's really hard to deny just how mixed some of the new variants can be, and how much they overshadow the actual new enemies with new models to them. Even Tag 1 had this problem a bit more now that I think about it, since while I wouldn't consider the Turn an enemy, we only had the Spirits, which just buff the stats of pre-existing demons otherwise, and the Bloodmaker, which while having its own unique attack patterns and stats is more of its own thing, is more or less just a more oppressive and harmful version of the Maker Drone. I don't think variants are inherently terrible, but I do think this DLC kinda rides on it a little bit too much, and how they're executed really don't help a whole lot either. Anyways, Stone Imp. They're basically just an imp that's invulnerable to most damage aside from the full auto attachment to the shotgun, which is kinda lame. Spirits being eliminated purely by the microwave beam was one thing, but at least you were encouraged and could use the microwave beam in other ways towards them and even towards other enemies. Here, it's not only kinda forced, since when this DLC came out, the full auto was kinda useless to the point that you'd only use it against these guys and nothing else, but also they're designed kinda hypocritically. For one, they can be killed instantly with a single smash from the Sentinel Hammer, but they can also be glory killed and chainsawed with no question. What? I kinda feel like this enemy would have been received a lot better at launch if the full auto buff that would later come with update 6.66 came with it. That way people would be encouraged to use it a lot more. But in general, it kinda bugs me how, while it appears that the full auto is the only way to kill it, it becomes a bit of a pushover when you find out that you can just as easily use the Sentinel Hammer and chainsaw it. I think adding another weapon or modification to do damage, even if at a lesser rate, would have helped balance this enemy a bit better, alongside making them unable to be chainsawed and only making them be stunned when striked with the hammer instead of it being an insta-kill. And I guess on that note, I should get into mentioning that already, since I'm kinda getting ahead of myself. Let's discuss what is easily Tag 2's most divisive, yet loved addition to the combat loop, the Sentinel Hammer. Replacing the slot of the Crucible, the Sentinel Hammer works where with 2 glory kills or weak point eliminations, you can slam it on the ground, not only killing every fodder demon in the area, but also stunning any larger health demons and giving yourself a bit of ammo too. Alongside this, you can use it on enemies with openings like the Cyber Baron and the Marauder to either prevent them from regaining their armor or increase their stun duration, and when done on enemies that are frozen or on fire, can give you even more health or armor respectively than when killed normally. The hammer is fun as hell to use, but it is absolutely overpowered in many respects, which is where a lot of its criticism comes from. I disagree with the notion that it trivializes combat, because I feel if it did that then it would just kill everyone instead of just stunning them. But it absolutely is overpowered with how you can gain so many resources with it, and also with its most contested trait, the charge requirement. It's not that hard to get 2 glory kills or 2 weak point eliminations in quick succession, so in turn you're gonna have it charged a lot. Like, you can use it and absolutely have it charged completely again not even 15 seconds later. And as a result, you're constantly divided between using it and not, because on one hand, it's really fun to use, but on the other, you get it back so fast and you get resources back so quick with it that it almost feels like cheating. There's 2 ways to balance the hammer if you ask me. The first way is through combat design. Specifically, the master level version of this level was specifically made so that you're using the hammer as much as you can, and cannon points only just scrape by with getting glory kills and weak point eliminations. This can be fun in its own right, yet at the same time I'm a bit mixed because in that master level it sometimes feels like you're using the hammer more than your actual weapons, which I feel is a bit antithetical to Eternal's combat. Don't get me wrong, it can be fun, but I feel like the hammer should be used as a way to just take a small ease off of combat, instead of something you're spamming every 25 seconds. With that in mind, the other way is just increasing the charge requirement. The reason the hammer required a max of 2 charges was because it was consistent with how many other charges you could hold for other abilities, such as the dash, blood punch, and frag grenades. Which makes sense, but if horde mode is anything to go by, having the hammer require 4 more charges doesn't make it feel any bit out of place. That being said though, I do feel like 4 is a little bit too high of a requirement. Maybe it's due to just how brutal horde mode can be, especially during its later arenas, but it always felt annoying to me if I got 3 charges and in turn was running around like an idiot trying to find 1 more just to feel it completely. I feel like 3 charges would work the absolute best both in this DLC and in horde mode, and in my opinion makes a bit more sense in terms of consistency considering the fact the spot the hammer takes place on the HUD is right next to the chainsaw, which has a max of 3, and also the fact that the Crucible could also hold a max of 3 charges. It just felt more natural to me for it to be that way, but that's just me. Oh man, I just realized I've barely mentioned the actual combat design or encounters in this level, and that's just because it's kinda just there. It's no secret that Tag 2 is a lot easier compared to Part 1, on the account that the devs at id thought, like myself, that they went too far in some respects on the difficulty. But in a weird roundabout sort of way, they went too far in the opposite direction if you ask me. I played Tag 2 on launch on Ultraviolence because I did not want to repeat my mistakes with Tag 1 again with playing on Nightmare. I've learned my lesson, Hugo. I don't know anything. But then I was kind of surprised considering that even on Nightmare, a lot of this DLC is a smooth ride save for like maybe a few sections. There's not a whole lot notable to talk about with the combat. It's kind of just on autopilot with nothing that really sticks out. And honestly feels easier too compared to something like Atlantica or Final Sin, especially this level. The encounters either range from being meh to just being annoying, and the latter is what unfortunately sticks out the most for me in this level and a lot of this DLC as a whole. Like this section here with the fountain and the mandatory purple goo floor. At least in the master level there's that meat hook tether at the top so you can have more mobility, but ugh. The goo already is a mixed deal in the first place, but it's done even worse when you make sections where you have to be stuck in it and you can't jump out of it save for meat hooking an enemy that's right in front of you and is likely to do a large amount of damage. I just never was a fan of this and it feels weirdly out of place compared to how easy most of the other encounters are. As for completion, not only do we have lore scrolls again, but in the place of Slayer gates, we have escalation encounters. After you do the first round of a Gore Nest encounter to upgrade your Sentinel Hammer, you're offered the chance to take on a much harder encounter with the reward of a skin. Again, I don't have much else to say here, especially compared to Tag 1. They look fine as rewards, but they're not my thing personally. The escalation encounters do offer a worthy challenge, but they feel just kinda there if you ask me. None of them really stick out in my mind except for the one in Reclaimed Earth, and even then that's only because I was stuck on it for a bit my first time. They're still enjoyable, don't get me wrong, but nothing about these encounters really stick out compared to Tag 1's Slayer gates to me. I also kinda don't like how the hammer upgrades are mandatory for progression. You have to complete the first part of the escalation encounter that rewards the upgrade in order to progress through the level, or else you're just blocked off by a wall. And the upgrades themselves more or less just make the hammer better and debatably more broken. Nothing that actually adds anything of substance to the weapon. More health from ice bombing, more armor from flame belching, and a longer stun duration respectively. That last one especially feels the most overpowered of the three if you ask me, just for the fact that you already get an increased stun duration when you use the hammer. And the rest of the DLC's encounters aren't really balanced around these mandatory upgrades, so in turn, it just feels like the hammer is making the DLC easier over time, aside from a few select encounters. I think if these upgrades had to exist, the rewards should have been swapped the other way around. Get a skin for completing a mandatory encounter, and put the powerful upgrade behind an incredibly challenging encounter. Forcing a player to earn that increased power by conquering a more challenging combat section would not only be more satisfying, but also give people more of an incentive to actually take on those second waves. Because aside from 100% completion or those aforementioned skins, I doubt any real casual players even bothered with the second encounters. Even the Slayer Gates in Tag 1 had the reward of support runes at the end of them, and you could still totally beat the expansion without them. They were just a piece of additional power you could earn through conquering a challenging encounter. Eventually, we make it to the spear itself, revealing itself to be not just a giant rock through the planet, but a spaceship the race used to start their own society, and what the hell? Why couldn't the whole level take place in here? This is 10 times more interesting than anything else in this level in the whole DLC, and we're only in here for one small bout of platforming before the level ends? Come on, man, why? And don't give me the excuse of, but they use this area in the master level, because it only uses the final room and then they just teleport you back to earlier areas while your frame rate kills itself. Seriously, I'm really upset they didn't use this area for more of the level. I love how it looks. Reminds me a lot of Black Mesa's incarnation of Zen, but it's only here for like 2 minutes. The whole level could have been a lot more memorable if you ask me, if it took place purely in here. I mean, after all, it's called the World Spear, not the grassy snowy area that surrounds the World Spear. Well anyways, we grab the crystal power source with plans to use it to power the Cave Davoth, located back on Earth, which should teleport us to Immora for the final battle.
You have the key to the Gate of Davoth. I will mark its location.
I'm just gonna get straight to the point. This is my least favorite level visually across the 2 DLCs, and it sucks because I had such high hopes for this one. The Earth levels are my personal favorites in Eternal's base game, so I was psyched to hear that we'd be returning there in part 2, but this honestly isn't what I had in mind. The green, grassy, overgrown vegetation doesn't work for a Doom level if you ask me. It feels like it belongs to a totally different game. And even then, it feels like it does nothing unique with the theme. I get it, you can't have a hellified Earth again after the death of the Icon of Sin. That just wouldn't make any sense with the story, I get that. But there isn't anything special with how this level looks, and this level totally could have had that. Looking at John Lane's original concept art for this level, it's clear it held a different atmosphere and visual identity from the final product that I wish was better realized. Not only are the waterfalls from the buildings a more memorable visual, but also the coloring and lighting brings a different, more distinct mood. More peaceful, but dreary enough to convey that your work is not yet done. It works a lot better tonally than the weird sunset-ish color scheme that we got. And even for the flow in arenas, it doesn't do anything for me either. It just feels like Final Sin in Hell on Earth, but more boring and with overgrown level geometry. And look, I'm not against the reuse of assets either. It's an inevitable thing within game development, and I feel it's okay if the reuse is in such a way that it makes the level feel unique or new. But this level just doesn't do that at all. Even though I know I haven't, I feel like I've played this level before. I guess the only real positives I can say is I like how the purple goo is used here, requiring you to double jump at just the right time to get the item in the puddle or else risk being stuck in it. It's a nice use of risk-reward design. That, and I do like the bits of environmental storytelling with the graffiti all over the city, even if it does get reused a lot by the end. But everything else in this level just blends in for the most part, aside from maybe that one arena near the end, which I'm still mixed on the design of. And the music just doesn't do it for me either. It feels weirdly slow for some reason. It really doesn't match the pace of combat at all. And speaking of combat, meet the Cursed Prowler.
You bear the mark. You are cursed.
he sucks ass. I'm not against the idea of an enemy requiring more attention than others. I think that can work great, but I just think this isn't executed well in the Cursed Prowler. They aren't even hard to kill or anything, but they're just annoying and tedious to deal with. Fundamentally, they work just like a normal Prowler, but with a more erratic movement pattern. When they hit you, the player comes struck with the curse effect, not only decreasing your health over time, but also disabling your dash and ability to meat hook the Prowler. Only with a blood punch are you able to kill them for good within a cursed state. Again, it's not like they're hard to kill or anything, but that erratic movement pattern, especially during the cursed state, is just annoying to deal with. I do like how that movement pattern means they're more inclined to sneak up on the player and catch them by surprise, but that's all I can really say that's positive about this enemy. They're really just annoying more than anything else to fight. We also have what was probably the most universally agreed missed opportunity of the DLC. The chain gunner. I mean, the Riot Soldier. After seeing how id was able to successfully translate all the classic enemies over to Eternal, many people were super excited to see how they would translate the final trifecta of Doom 2's most notorious enemies to the game, next to the Revenant and Archvile. Essentially, they're a normal shield guy, but armed with a chain gun and shield that cannot be removed with the plasma rifle. A well-placed grenade, sticky bomb, or remote detonate rocket can basically kill them instantly. And that's the main problem if you ask me. He poses almost no threat whatsoever. Just one well-placed explosive is all that's needed to kill them, and in most cases, for me at least, I always kill him before he is even able to do his attack on me. It's rare as a whole that he ever hits me in the middle of combat due to just how much you're already moving, and the damage by default he does from his normal attack is pitiful. Even in the World Spears Master level, he barely poses a threat, and that whole level is harder than Tag 2, debatably even Tag 1. That charge up attack he does sometimes does take off a good chunk of your health, but again, it's rare that either A, he'll actually hit you with it, or B, he isn't dead by the time he decides to do it. You basically have to stand still in order for him to actually hit you, which again is almost non-existent in a game that literally tells you to move constantly. I kinda disagree with the notion many have that he should have been hit scanned because of the fact of how you're dealing with so much more in Eternal other than just the enemies on screen like your own health, ammo, and armor. Having to deal with an enemy that could end you in a split second like their classic counterparts would be just too much combined with everything else and too unfair to the player. I think a better alternative would be not only to make him attack much sooner upon spawning, but also to make his chain gun accurately lock on you, kinda like the Revenant or Doom Hunter's rockets. Giving him a tiny bit more movement as well to at least allow them to get to a good vantage point before locking onto you would help a lot as well, since from what I can tell they just share the same AI as the normal shield guys who are inherently not super confrontational. They just don't feel finished. I don't think the fact that id didn't make the Riot Soldiers exactly like their classic counterparts was the problem with these guys, but more so how they just aren't a threat and stick out like a sore thumb compared to just how aggressive and confrontational all of the other enemies are. Well, most of the other enemies anyways. We power up the Gate Davoom and are on our way for Immora for the final battle. I'll tell you one thing, even if this level is kinda just more the same in terms of encounters for the most part, they absolutely went all in visually, at least with the backgrounds. And this opening cutscene just shows it. All the portals opening up with the demons and sentinels prepping for battle combined with Levy's composition gave me goosebumps the first time I played. And hey, wait, are they holding the lightning gun from 2016 multiplayer? Huh. But anyway, it absolutely does feel like the final battle, even if the actual combat of this level doesn't completely match that tone. And that fight between the mech and the Titan at the beginning of the level in the skybox, absolutely hype. Fucking metal as shit. And the music? I've heard people call this track specifically Levy's personal mic drop, the outcome of his experience becoming more familiar with Doom's music style whilst developing these expansions, and I would totally believe it. I like Atlantica a tiny bit more personally, but I cannot deny that Immora's music is probably the rawest fucking track in the entire DLC. It matches the tone of the level perfectly, and it goes hard. I swear, if we don't get official release of these tracks one day, I'm gonna lose it. They have the tracks, they just need Bethesda's approval. Guys, please let them do this. I will pay good money for it. Anyways, the more I think about it, I'm mixed on Immora's visual design, because aside from the skybox and background, this level just feels like Red Urdak, which I guess makes sense in terms of the lore, but even then it always just felt kind of bland in that regard. It really does feel like they blew their load for half of this level's visual design, which is really bizarre. Oh, and I nearly forgot when writing the script, our last enemy introduced in the DLC, the Immora soldier. He is a literal ammo pinata. Seriously, this enemy screams unfinished to me, because all these guys do is amble around randomly like blood civilians attempting to shoot you with 2016's Reaper from multiplayer, only to miss you every single time and do absolutely zero damage. And that's just a lie, because that thing demolished in multiplayer, especially that alt fire. I went absolutely crazy with that. Get on my level, dude. They can't be glory killed or chainsawed, which at first sounds like a gimmick for the enemy, but honestly, I think that's just because they had no time to even animate those. It doesn't happen nowadays since their health got slightly buffed, but I remember that if you so much as meat hooked them on launch day, they would just instantly die, even if you didn't shoot them with the SSG. These guys may as well not even exist. And again, combat is more the same for the most part, but a part of me likes the flow of these arenas a little bit more compared to how boxy Reclaimed Earth was. The one that's used for the escalation encounter is a highlight, and so is that dual Marauder Screecher encounter near the end. The more I think about it too, that encounter specifically sticks out like a sore thumb compared to everything else. Not because it's bad, it's creative, but it's a weird difficulty spike out of nowhere, which I guess goes double for how this DLC ends. It feels more on par with something you'd see in Tag 1, which this DLC doesn't even come close to replicating at most other points. This one right near the end is also a highlight, even if what comes after with all those stone imps and shotgun shells with a haste in the middle is really out of place. I guess you can call the latter the last true encounter of the game? As we approach the Dark Lord's Sanctum, we lose our connection to the intern. We're on our own from here. It's time to kick Davoth's ass and end this.
Stand and fight, Slayer. Honor your true god. Fight and show me your purpose.
I'm gonna be totally real. I really do not understand the absolute amount of vitriol this boss gets. Is he perfect? God no. Is he a disappointment for what is essentially the root of all evil and the reason for Hell's existence? Totally. Is he better than any of the bosses in the base game? Hell no. But I always found him weirdly fun to fight despite all of that. The main critique people have with this fight is that the Dark Lord is fundamentally a larger Marauder with more health. I totally get that complaint, especially for, again, what is the final boss of the whole adventure, but I was never really bugged by that personally, just for the fact that I like fighting Marauders. And even if his entire fight is a difficulty spike out of nowhere for first time players, it felt satisfying to master my first time. Beating him after dying so many times to him really did feel satisfying. I never really got the complaint either that his attack patterns or the move where he opens up is inconsistent, because in my experience it isn't that way at all. If anything, it's a more literal version of the Marauder's tutorial text. Instead of waiting for him to run at you to open up, you need to stay in that sweet spot of not too close and not too far away. Doing that will consistently get him to open after a few normal attacks. That being said, despite me enjoying the experience of fighting him personally, this boss does have crucial flaws that make him a real downgrade compared to the other ones before this. For one, there isn't a whole lot to worry about aside from the boss itself. What makes bosses like the Gladiator, the Icon of Sin, or even Samur so interesting is how you're dealing with so much more than the boss itself. Lots of medium tier demons like Hell Knights, Prowlers, Carcasses, and much more are spawned in to give you much more to worry about, and the fight not doing this just makes it feel like it's lacking in comparison to everything else. Aside from some ghost demons that can easily be taken out with a single hammer swing, all you're really going to need to worry about is the Dark Lord himself, and as a result, the fight feels a lot more boring compared to everything else. Alongside this, the lack of change throughout makes this fight overstay its welcome fast. The boss is 5 phases according to the HUD, but it's more like 3 split up in a weird way. Aside from spawning more of these ghost enemies after specific phases, which can still be taken out with a single hammer swing, he doesn't change a whole lot. You basically just play the same way every phase and you're good. That, and it's more of a nitpick I'm aware, but the checkpoints for this boss are inconsistent with how the rest of the bosses in Eternal work, and that always bugged me. At the end of each phase for Eternals bosses, you'd always be guaranteed a checkpoint, yet with the exception of the first phase, you're only given a checkpoint every 2 phases. It's not a big deal now with how I'm used to how this fight works, but that always just felt weird. This fight's music's kinda cool too. It's a Hulshult track that sounds mostly original, but actually has a bunch of hidden musical motifs from the series as a whole. I get the complaints with this fight, by all means. It's clear too that this fight was meant to have more, like incorporating that dragon we saw in World Spear's cutscene according to Hugo on the dev streams. Hell, I wish too that Davoth's mech didn't exist either and it felt like a true mirror match of sorts. That would have been so memorable. But I just never understood how this boss brought out so much hatred within people to the point where he ruined the entire expansion for them. He's not the best boss in the game, nor is he the worst. He's somewhere in the middle. After the third phase, we're given a lore dump of sorts that probably would have surprised me more if I didn't read the lore scroll that revealed this beforehand in Immora.
For too long have I been imprisoned by my own creations. You will not stop my vengeance, nor the one who betrayed me. Tell him.
He is the first being, and my creator. When he fell, I ascended.
They lied to you, Slayer. Immora and its people would have been perfect, if not for the treachery of my servants. They sealed me away, stole my power and name, and now the time has come for a reckoning.
Granted, I'm not a giant lore junkie as much as others likely are, but I personally never understood how the reveal of Davoth being the true god of the universe ruined the lore. Maybe there's something I'm missing, but to me it made sense when you put it in context compared to everything else that happens in Eternal's timeline. I really can't think of anything it gets in the way of. It's a bit confusing for sure, but it's not like it invalidates anything else that happens in the story up to this point. With the Dark Lord finally at the mercy of the Slayer, he takes his helmet off and we get what is, in my honest opinion, one of the coolest moments in the entire series.
Tell me, have you nothing to say to your creator before you strike him down?
All of you who said the Slayer talking was cringe have no right to speak. With the death of the Dark Lord, all of Hell's forces fade away from the universe. All is well, or so it seems for a brief moment. Due to how the Dark Lord indirectly gave the Slayer his powers via the Divinity Machine, the Slayer faints, losing his power due to Davoth's death.
By his hand, all things were made. Even you.
I really love the slight use of Hellwalker's ambient bits in this cutscene. Feels super fitting with just how everything is wrapped up and comes full circle. We see 3 hooded maker figures as the lid of a stone sarcophagus is laid over, encasing us in darkness. They walk off, presumably to guard, as the screen fades to black and we're given a familiar message from 2016's opening loading screen. May the blood on your sword never dry, and may we never need you again. Korax entry 717.
What?
This ending absolutely surprised people, and for good reason, yet I never got the backlash surrounding it. It's a bit confusing, I agree, since even I thought at first the Slayer just died until you see that final quotation, which basically just tells you that he's still alive. He's just been Master Chiefed like at the end of Halo 3. But I never understood either how it would have been better if the Slayer actually got a happy end. In fact, I'd argue it wouldn't have been satisfying, and I'll tell you exactly why. Throughout 2016, and especially Eternal, we see subtle moments of the Slayer's humanity. This is seen especially through the Fortress of Doom if you ask me, looking at his room specifically. He collects toys, plays PC games, plays music, and acts just like anyone else. He even has a bunny cage still from when he had Daisy and even a torn up photo of his former family. The reason I bring this up is because stuff like this shows the kind of person the Slayer is. Despite his powers, he's just like any other human with passions and interest and a desire for companionship. Yet he's been thrust into a battle with no end. The Slayer knows for a fact that if he stops fighting, nothing will be safe. He's been given so many opportunities to stop his crusade and live whatever peaceful life he has left, and even the chance to relive what he had.
I know of what you have left behind. Go back to it then. Leave this crusade. You cannot save them. If you let the priest live, then I will return to you what the demons took from you so long ago. You need only turn back, and it will be yours again. All the pain you carry will be gone.
Yet, he still feels the need to preserve the good of human life for others, even if it comes at the cost of his own. This ending works because it shows the tragedy of his character. We want the Slayer to have a happy ending, but he knows for a fact he can't because it puts the entire universe in jeopardy. It's kind of the inverse of Samurai Jack's ending and its fan reaction. Jack was able to get back to the past and defeat Aku once and for all, yet at the cost of all his friends he's met along the way alongside Ashi. And while Jack was able to move on to forge new adventures, many fans were still polarized by this ending because it almost made it feel like everything was for nothing. It's why many wish the ending would be more akin to the IDW comics, where he chooses to stay in the past, fighting every day and making the most of everything he has, as it debatably fits much better for the series and its themes as an ending. Honestly, the reception to this DLC, and particularly its final third, feels not far off to the reception of Black Ops 3's Revelations. That map, much like Tag 2, was built up in marketing to be the ultimate end of a decade-long story, and just felt flaccid by the end. Obviously, we didn't know at the time that this wasn't truly the end, but again, you can't blame people for thinking that and being disappointed considering how marketing said otherwise. I'm satisfied with this ending, because not only is it a nice way to end off things, but it's very clear they're setting up for more in the future. It feels fitting and nice, winding up sort of back where we all began. And after all, as a wise man once said,
again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
Overall, despite having more low points than high personally, I still think Tag 2 is an enjoyable experience for the most part. Yet it still bites that it feels like so much more could have been done. This next part is more speculative than anything else since nothing really discussing the DLC's development cycle has really come out, so take what I say with a grain of salt, but either way, I really do believe it was rushed for this DLC. It only makes sense to me considering not only how unfinished some elements and balancing feels, but also how it launched on just 2 years shy of the 1 year anniversary of the game, to make sure it didn't go any further than what was promised on the year 1 DLC page description. It's clear they wanted to do much more, but didn't want to go beyond what was promised, which sucks because I really do think there were some great ideas here. And it's even weirder because people were clearly fine with the base game being delayed, which obviously paid off, resulting in a more polished quality product. Why couldn't they just delay the DLC? I guess we'll never know. Again, it's not to say this entire DLC is bad, but combined with fans' expectations going in, so much about it doesn't feel on par with what the base game had, and even Tag 1 for as mixed as I personally was on some aspects. It just makes me wish development was different for not just with this specific expansion being rushed, but even for the fact of them being developed purely at home, resulting in it likely having to downscale whatever plans that they had beforehand. Altogether, while flawed in many respects and not everyone's cup of tea, I enjoy these DLCs and most of what they add to the game. It may not be for everyone, but it's dumb to deny what work did go into it, even if it wasn't to everyone or even its own expectations. I feel like a lot of the discussion on these expansions are too radical on either side, being that they're either totally perfect or wholly terrible. I think they're somewhere in between, with parts I love and dislike, although a part of me does also believe that the $30 asked for both the DLCs altogether is a bit too much. 6 levels in total feels more like 20-25, although that's just me. I don't mind as much since, I mean, come on, I'm a Doom fan. I was gonna buy this no matter what. But to anyone else, it might be hard to convince to pick it up if it isn't during a sale. As for id and Doom Eternal's future, I'm not entirely sure at this point. We haven't had a major update since October, and I'm really uncertain if we'll get anything on that level again. And it confuses me with how they're even treating the additions with the last update. For as much as I liked Horde mode initially, there's basically no reason to replay it, as they've only changed bounty and blitz round demon spawns, and nothing else. Unless you want to keep your score placement on the board, there's no real reason to go back to it. And yet battle mode still gets all the new cosmetic awards with nothing new for Horde, which confuses me considering it was made with the purpose of giving single player fans a reason to consistently come back to the game. Invasion is still MIA as well, even though in retrospect they never really made it clear whether or not Horde was intended to be its replacement purely and that it just wasn't coming. There's a chance too that id is already getting started on their next project if recent job listings are anything to go by, and considering how small the company is, they probably need all hands on deck for whatever's next. And that's fine, I'll definitely be there for whatever they end up making, but a part of me feels slightly bitter and confused for how much the game is in the dark right now. Even if they can't do anything else or don't have the resources or finances to do anything right now, I would understand that, but I just wish they'd say something since, to my knowledge, we haven't had any form of dev community interaction since December last year. And even then too, there is an audience for people who want more. I know people would gladly pay for a master level pack adding more of them for the missing ones in the game. I'm aware not every game can last forever. It's an inevitability that all services must come to an end. But there's a part of me that wishes Eternal could live on somehow, even if I think the story shouldn't advance forward for a while. Sure, we have people making mods, but the current tools and methods people use are so limited in what's possible. Even if it just gave us mod tools as is like Halo MCC has been doing, I think it would go a long way towards making the game last. I know I'm kinda just rambling now, but I can't really help it when it comes to something like this. As happy as I am with the expansions, I can't help but want more. And that's what bites the most with having a game as good as this. And while that may sound bitter, I want to assure everyone that that is a good thing. Well, that's all I got for today. If you somehow made it this far, I'd like to personally say thank you for listening to me as long as you did. This has been my largest project to date, and it genuinely means a lot you decided to stay the whole way through. But hey, what do you think of the DLCs? I always love videos like this because it brings out so many interesting discussions with people who have different experiences. So please, let me know what you think, either in terms of what you think of the DLCs or even how I did with this very long format. Have a great night, everyone, and thanks for watching.
Hello? He's still here? Great. I have a message for you from Marty, Hugo, and all the hardworking devs at id Software. Thanks for playing. Hell wouldn't be the same without you.